Okay, sorry about that. Brain like a sieve. Maybe I should start that again. I
It's all
suppose.
right. I'm here.
Yeah. Okay, so Colin is going to open this edition by reading the next instalment of his ongoing fantasy series for us. So please welcome back to the mic Colin A Brett and Theo.
Thank you. Um, I should let you know that this isn't the next installment. This
Oh,
is the last installment of Theo. I've got plenty more to come, but this is the last part that involves Theo.
fair
And
enough.
at the end of the last session, um, Theo helped an elf avoid a nasty, horrible spider. They've battled the creature away and killed it, and then spent the night um, resting up in the forest. And then, as they went home back to the elf's encampment, they heard elven horns in the distance.
Mm.
Um, and now we pick up basically the following night where Theo is sitting in the elf camp. Theo was sitting by the campfire thinking over what he had just experienced. The elves had given him a guarded welcome, even had him covered with knocked arrows at first, until Rio's father, Tarastor, evidently an elf of some importance, had come forward, trailing a sheepish Rio in his wake. Rio had apologized for leading Theo astray from his mission and for risking his life in fighting the spider. There were gasps when Theo had said no apology was necessary, and that indeed Rio had saved his own life against that foul creature. You are clearly a man of ideals, though you may be, Theodoric Mistmoon, said Tarastor, but do not reject my son's apology for his foolhardiness, which has put your life at such risk. Theo thought for a moment before replying. Clearly, despite the childhood ghost stories he'd been told about them, at least this clan of elves were people of honour and pride. To belittle Rio's apology could be construed as an insult to his family and perhaps even the whole clan. Real and Iathello, I accept your apology, said Theo, and extend my own thanks to you for saving my life. Theo held out his hand, which, after a nod from his father, Rio took and shook firmly. I name you an elf friend, Theodoric Mistmoon, holder of this small token of our gratitude of thanks, declared Tarastor, and he handed Theo a green gem about the size of Theo's thumbnail. It is a waystone, continued Tarastor. If held just so, he demonstrated by placing the gem into Theo's open palm, it can help you find your way home. Theo was taken by surprise. This gem was magical. I thank you, he stammered. In the name of my family and my own band, I thank you. His reverie was interrupted when a small finger prodded his shoulder. Are you really a man? Said the elf child. A girl of maybe 6 human years, but possibly much older, realized Theo. There are some I think I'm a man, replied Theo. Some who think I'm just a worthless boy, he added a little sadly, remembering the bullies in the gypsy band. But what do you think? She asked pointedly. Do you think you're a man or a boy? I don't really know what to think, Theo answered, somewhat taken aback by the girl's precocious manner. My mother says that I'm at that awkward age, not quite man, but no longer really a boy. I think your mother is wise, she replied, then looked directly into Theo's eyes. You have a long way to go, Theodoric Mistmoon. I see friends, enemies, even lovers, she looked a little embarrassed, in your path. Cherish them, for even enemies in their own way will have something to teach you. There was a long silence between the two of them. Theo had heard his mother's stories many times, some of them even concerning him, but they had all involved her use of cards, crystal, or the palm. This girl had no such tools, but still moved Theo with the power of her words. Whether she was accurate or not remains to be seen, thought Theo, but if she has the gift, as her mother would say, it was certainly strong. Still, the girl went on, more brightly now, you don't take the first step until tomorrow. Tonight, you eat and rest and play. She gestured towards Theo's lute. Sing me a song, she demanded. So a slightly mystified Theo began playing, nursery songs in the Mannish tongue to begin with, and, much to the girl's delight, then to a rousing tune about a gypsy's life on the road. The girl was dancing on the spot. "Sing about the spider," she said mid-pirouette. "So Rio ran from the raging arachnid," Theo sang with a smile, but faded slightly as he realized another 6 or so elves had joined him at the fireside and begun tuning up their own instruments. Tripped and tumbled tail over toes, to Rio it seemed it was all but done. But Theo leapt in, sword swinging, ever so scared, but he would not run. The rest of the impromptu orchestra chimed in at that point, picking up the songs and following through to the end of the battle. They carried on playing, harps and lutes and flutes and drums, applauding Theo's skill with his own instrument. The concert lasted well into the night, and many more of the clanspeople joined in with the singing. Theo learned some new songs, in Mannish mostly, but leavened with lines of Elven in places. All the while, Theo looked for Rio, but his friend was nowhere to be seen. The girl saw the look on Theo's face and said, "He's on sentry duty, and will be for at least a month if his father has his way." She giggled, clearly enjoying the punishment being visited on Rio. The following morning was bitterly cold, and low clouds threatened snow before noon. The elves were preparing for the day ahead. Despite Anders' scare stories, they were not moving through the region. They had, in fact, elected to winter here in the woods. While the trees were becoming bare of leaves, the branches would still afford plenty of cover against the coming snow. Theo shared breakfast with Rio and the elven girl, whose name was Iriel, and who turned out to be a cousin of Rio's. Despite her appearance, she was nearly 16 summers old and would not come of age, in the Mannish parlance, for another 16 years. Rio himself was over 30 years old by human reckoning, had just come into manhood according to elven tradition, and, after his recent recklessness, it might be another 10 years before he was considered an adult by his kin. Theo listened in rapt fascination. Clearly, Mannish superstition, fear, and hatred had coloured the stories he'd been told about the elves, and painted them all as irredeemably evil, whereas, for this clan at least, that was patently untrue. "This is where I leave you," said Rio. The pair had walked for a few miles through the woods. "Our domain, as you might call it, comes to an end just at that rise." Theo gestured to a small hillock about 50 yards away. "Beyond that, we have no power." "Power for what?" asked Theo, intensely interested. "Would this be more elven magic?" "We can protect ourselves well enough, so long as our scouts and sentries remain in this area. It is as far as our swiftest runners can get back to camp should danger threaten." He smiled. "We're surrounded by a dozen elves, even though they are well concealed." "What about wolves and goblins?" Theo asked. "We're not concerned about wolves. Some of our people have a certain empathy with wolves, which allows them to steer them clear of our camp. As for the goblins," he added with some distaste, "it's unlikely any of them would make from that rise to where we are standing." Rio finished with a somewhat grim smile and extended his hand. They shook hands, and Rio nodded in the direction of the rise. "By my father's reckoning, it's about 10 miles to where your hetman Mandel is camped." Theo looked surprised. "We have ways of knowing what's beyond the borders, Theo," Rio explained. "Magic," said Theo, "like the waystone." "I can't say," said Rio. "Such things are beyond me, Theo. Just know that we will spend winter here safely under the trees. Take care of yourself and your loved ones." With that, they parted. Theo set off, strumming his lute in the direction of the elven border. As he topped the rise, he turned back, raised his hand, and shouted, "Farewell, Raelin." Rio had vanished. Feeling somewhat lost and empty, Theo turned away. He continued playing, singing the song of the spider as he walked. The music lifted his mood, and soon Theo switched to a jauntier ballad, suitable for marching to. The miles fell away beneath his feet. As he had expected, the snow began around noon. He was resting on a fallen tree trunk, eating the provisions Iriel had given him, and felt the first flakes of winter brush his cheeks. Looking up through the nearly leafless tree branches, he could see the grey snow clouds and scraps of watery blue sky. Thankfully, there was not far to go to Mandel's encampment now. He should reach it before the snow became heavier. Theo packed up the remains of his lunch and marched on. A further hour or so of walking through the forest brought Theo to the edge of Mandel's camp. 2 sentries approached him, one aiming a crossbow at his chest. Theo slowly raised his hands. "Who are you?" asked one of the men. "I am Theodoric Mistmoon of Agarity's band. I have a message for your hetman. There were mutterings between the men, and the shooter tightened his grip on the crossbow. Mistmoon, eh? Said the first, uneasily. It seemed to Theo that his family name was regarded with a certain suspicion, even in a different gypsy band. I have the message in my pack, Theo said helpfully, with his eyes on the crossbowman. It carries Hetman O'Garrity's seal. He made to unsling his pack. Whoa there, grunted the crossbowman, raising his weapon. Step back over there and open your bag, he ordered. The other man nodded in agreement at this precaution. Plainly the men, and likely Hetman Mandel, were on edge about something, Theo realized. He kept his hands raised and backed 10 paces away. Slowly he bent and undid his pack, rummaged for a moment and found the message. It was a red leather folder sealed with black wax, bearing the imprint of O'Garrity's seal, an arm crooked and raised as if preparing for an arm wrestling match. Theo tossed the package to all the men, who could clearly see the seal. Keep him covered, said the first man, and bent to pick up the package. Seems legit, he said. I'll take this to the boss man and see what he says. He looked sharply at Theo. Don't let him move from that spot. Theo remained calm for the seemingly interminable time it took for the sentry to return. Standing in the freezing cold with a wicked-looking crossbow pointed squarely at his chest did not make his wait any easier. When the sentry did return, he still looked suspiciously at Theo, but said to his partner, He's clear. Boss Mandel has apparently been expecting him. He pointed at Theo. You come with me, he said. Thus was Theo ushered into Mandel's camp. Many questions were on his mind, not least among them was why the gypsies were on tenterhooks. Was there a hitherto unknown disagreement between Mandel and O'Garrity? Or could Mandel's band have heard the elves were in the area and were guarding against such a mysterious threat? Had he walked into a war between the gypsies and the elves? Such wild speculation, Theo realized as he walked through the camp, was pointless. Relations between gypsy bands were notoriously hard to govern, let alone predict, and if deep-seated distrust of the elves was also a factor, things could spiral out of control. Whatever came to pass, Theo had an uneasy feeling he would be caught in the middle of it. There you go. Thank you.
Right, fabulous. So please put your hands together for Colin and Mistmoon. Colin A Brett.
Thank you.
No, I've got that wrong, haven't I?
Theo.
Theo Mistmoon.
That's right, yes.
Fabulous. Okay. So Colin also organises the techie side of the live stream. So many thanks to him for that. Obviously, he's quite a tech-minded person, which I'm very grateful for. Now I understand from Colin that he plans to read a follow-on piece, but not about Theo, from the same piece of work.
It'll be a different character from the same world.
Yeah. Okay, that's in March. That'll be next time. Yeah, that'll be
next time, yes.
Okie dokie. So this afternoon we have 2 new readers for you, plus 2 readers who have read before. And our next reader this afternoon is Amanda Reed, who last read on Fiction Fix Online in November. She has a book out entitled Lost and Waiting. So let's rejoin the narrative with Amanda for further adventures with her heroine Evangeline in Chile in search of the World Tree.
Thank you, Helen. Thanks very much. So I'm going to read the very opening chapter this evening.
Right.
And it's chapter 1, Green in Buenos Aires.
Mm.
In the taxi, Evangeline's attention fell on the photo of 2 children taped to the dash. A serious girl with plaits and a younger boy grinning gap-toothed. Unmoored as ever when caught off guard, she pulled away from the picture and fixed on the passing violet-blossomed jacarandas, washing the city with new beginnings. Showered, changed, and kitten-heeled, it was early evening by the time Evangeline went in search of a drink and Wi-Fi. A sultry rumba spilling from a bar off the main drag beckoned to her. Seated near a tiny stage and with a beer on the way, she recognised Libertango played with brio by an elderly accordionist, a lanky cadaver on double bass, and a pianist in denial of a receding hairline. Evangeline twitched her shoulders obligingly along with the music and stretched her legs beneath the table. Before she got too carried away, she reached for her phone. Her inbox had been busy while she'd been offline. She opened the first email as more loaded. Thank you for your interest in working with Asclepion to develop your preliminary study, Project World Tree, a taxonomic framework and distribution map. Asclepion regularly reviews its projects to ensure a robust pipeline and accelerated delivery of the next generation of medicines in meeting global health challenges. After careful prioritization, we have concluded that investing in Project World Tree is not the right direction for Asclepion. What? There must be some mistake. She was already here. A knot tightened inside her as she reread the email. They couldn't do this. They signed an agreement. Surely the other project partners, the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew and the Chilean University of Santiago, would be up in arms over Asclepion's renegade behaviour. Evangeline read in horror as they decided the project's fate without reference to her at all. Didn't they have to involve the project manager in such discussions? Apparently not. From there, the three partners moved on to horizon scanning into potential areas of mutual interest to them, of zero interest to her. In among the high-level stuff, one email was to Evangeline alone. I'm sure you're absolutely fuming right now. I know I am. I asked around here at Kew, and it looks as though Asclepion are within their rights to back out even at this late stage. Obs, there's had to be a knee-jerk over the scandal. I'm super sorry I can't now join you on your expedition. Perhaps you could get some funding from another source? At the very least, make a holiday out of the trip. Find alternative funding at this late stage. The botanist would have known just how remote that possibility was. And what scandal? Trending on Twitter had the answer. Amazon Bio. We all have a global responsibility to put an end to unethical bioprospecting. Foreign pharma giant criticised over attempts to patent the knowledge of indigenous people in the Amazon without consent. #AsclepionGate. All this had exploded while Evangeline was asleep in the air over the Atlantic. By now, everyone would have left work for the weekend. She should have looked in more detail at Asclepion's business practices, but the offer of money and escape blinded her. What were her options? A minute or so staring at the pristine tablecloth drew a blank. How different an experience it must have been before the advent of long-haul flights and the global village. Edwin Chilly Morgan's account of his travels in the region during the mid-19th century was full of adventure. Plant hunter, raconteur, philosopher, and with such a lust for life as to sweep Evangeline along in his enthusiasm, Morgan was the reason she was here. Her best friend, her only friend, was a dead man, long dead. If Morgan were here, he would know what to do. She rubbed her earring between finger and thumb. It was one of a pair she had made up from Morgan's cufflinks. Gold, the size of small coins, they bore a well-worn relief of 4 radial lines ending in crow's feet, with a star, sun, and crescent moon in each of the 4 segments. Lost and waiting, a voice said in her head. What was that? The waiter was pouring her beer. Holiday? The insistence of his voice suggested this wasn't the first time he had asked the question. No, not really. She felt slow, as if in need of cranking up her gears. She squeezed the earring, warm from the heat of her hand. No, I'm on my way to Chile. Now the words were out there, the knot slackened between her shoulders. She didn't have to go home straight away. The flight to Chile was booked and paid for. Why waste it? What are you planning to do in Chile? An accented masculine voice came from the next table. Subtly expensive, olive-skinned and with the first signs of grey, the man wore his shirt cuffs folded back with clinical precision. He was alone. He must be on business then. But what? Had to be something more exotic than IT. A wine dealer? He carved into a steak that dwarfed his plate. I was planning to do a tour, she said, starting from Santiago and driving down to Villarica. The town? The volcano? You're interested in geology, volcanology? I'm interested in plants. A hunter of plants, then? He nodded his approval, then waved his fork in the air, rewinding a spool. You say you were planning to go. Does that mean you're not now going? I don't know. His not knowing her was a freedom of sorts. There was no fear of hitting up against the double brick wall of Mum and Will that always happened when any talk of her plans arose. A strange alliance, that one. Until Effie was born, Mum didn't have much time for Evangeline's ex. Now she was ever urging Evangeline to get back with Will. The thing is, Evangeline said, I intended to find a particular tree. This tree has only ever been recorded once, and that was almost 200 years ago. If the tree still exists, it is hugely important, but I've just had news which makes it look like the trip's off. The fork went in while she spoke. He ate with his mouth closed, the muscles in his jaw efficient at dispatching the meat. He nodded, whether an acknowledgement of what she said or a judgment on the steak, she couldn't tell. He swallowed his food and said, I hope your news was not so serious. It is a pity for you to have come all this way for nothing. This tree you speak of, it is medicinal, no? That's what we think, yes. A tree from the same family has ethnobotanic value among the Mapuche. The relationship between people and plants goes back to Eve and the apple, he said under his breath. He pointed to her empty glass. Can I get you another drink? Perhaps some wine? Argentina prides itself on its wine. I'd love one, thanks. But she sounded a little too keen for a drink. What did it matter? After Asclepion's bombshell, a drink was exactly what she wanted. Thank you.
Right. Brilliant. Okay, so Lost and Waiting. Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. And now we are going to welcome a first-time reader who is also a member, I believe, of the Bristol Con community. Is that right, Kevlin?
That's correct, yes.
Yes, fabulous. Now you told me earlier that this particular story isn't available in any of your publications, but
no.
hopefully it will be at some point.
That is the hope. Yes, I have kind of tentative plans on a collection, and it's in there. But of the other anthologies that I've had stories published in, of which you can find them on Amazon actually. If you look up Kevlin Henney, it'll.
I have had a look. I know you're there.
So there's a bunch of stuff. It's appeared there, but I now realised only when you asked me beforehand, has this one been published there? It's like no. So it's somewhere out on the web. It's been published a couple of times, but I haven't tracked which websites still carry it.
Right. Okay. So if you do find that out and want to come back to me with the information, I'm happy to put it up with everybody else's. So. Okay, so so a warm welcome, please, to Kevlin Henney and his flash fiction story. Does it start off as flash fiction and grow a bit?
Well, it's what is the definition of flash fiction, and it's either under 500 words, under 800, or under 1,000, or under 300. This one is kind of at the longer end. It's under 1,000, so it's a self-contained story. You get the whole story today.
Yeah. Okay. So it's Ashes to Ashes, Mañana Mañana, and it's by Kevlin Henney. So please clap into the microphone.
Thank you very much.
Right. Fabulous.
A discreet click, and the images and chaos disappeared into darkness. Beth lowered the remote. It was a moment before Jay frowned at her across the sofa, as if the light of what Beth had done had been delayed, reluctant to reach his eyes. A moment before his, "Why did you do that?" cut through all the other questions, the fears that had flooded to fill the silence. Do you really want to spend the last few minutes of your life, the last few minutes of everything, watching TV? Jay scrunched his mouth in a way Beth recognized, a way that meant he knew she had a point, but he didn't know how to acknowledge it. I always thought that, if something like this happened, we'd have more than a couple of minutes, Beth said, looking out at the sky, sharp and blue and as clear of clouds as it was a premonition. Nothing to justify or hint at the fate that would soon rain down. I always thought the answer would be obvious, Jay said, staring at the floor. To what? To the question of what I want to do at the end of the world. How would I want to spend my last few minutes? The answer from most adult males is probably still the same as any adolescence. An answer too obvious to even question, or so I thought. That hadn't actually crossed my mind, Beth turned from the window, scowling at Jay, crossing her arms. Nor mine, really. Jay looked up, offering a smile in apology. So where does that leave us? Through the floor came the dulled sound of television. From the flat above came gentle sobbing. The street outside was as still and free of foreboding as any perfect Sunday morning. No cars, no people, no sound. Silence. Perhaps resigned silence, pensive and reflective. Or perhaps unaware, blissful and unknowing, the silence of those still asleep, enjoying a lie-in, or lost in recovery of a hangover. Jay sighed. I could really do with a cigarette. Bit late for that now. Unless you kept a secret stash from before we met, or, you took up smoking again on the sly, you'll never get any in time. Well, there's a stash of sorts, but not from the land that time forgot. Beth raised an eyebrow. Oh, nothing behind your back. You remember when Yuri stayed with us a few weeks back? Yeah, smoked like a chimney, a terrace row of chimneys. Yeah, he left half a packet behind. I put it away for, well, I don't know what. But I guess the end of the world is as good an excuse as any to light up. It's not like I'll be able to get the habit again. Won't even finish the first one. Jay got up and went to the kitchen. But never doing today what could be put off until tomorrow had filled the small space with Jenga towers of recycling, washing up, and last night's debris. 2 pizza boxes, his and hers not quite finished wine bottles, and the lingering air of the row that had stormed from kitchen to living room and into sleep. Nothing that would ever be cleared up now. He rummaged at the back of the odds and ends drawer. Returning with a pack of cigarettes and a box of matches, Jade's lips pulled a stale cigarette from the pack as the tick-fizz hush of a match brought to life lit the silence. In the still air of the living room, reflex called habit out of retirement, to cup his hands around the newborn flame, as if he and he alone could shield it from the coming storm. Jay lit up and took a drag that went deeper than all the world's troubles and its end could ever reach. He held it a moment, breathing out, his eyes closed, his shoulders sloped to calm, his body loosened. Beth watched the release, entranced by this unfamiliar ripple through a body whose movements she knew so well. She reached across and drew a cigarette from the packet. As Jay raised an eyebrow, she lit up. The breath she took came back at once, convulsing her, eyes wide. I'm guessing that's your first time. Beth coughed and laughed and coughed again. Yeah, you guessed right. Not something I've ever wanted to try. Not at school, not at uni, not at the office party. But we're here. Just you and me at the end. I wanted to share something. I thought no harm in trying, nothing to lose. How hard could it be? She coughed again. Harder than I thought, and less pleasant. Not sure I want to try that again. She smiled. But at least we both have cigarette breath. She leant over towards Jay. Jay pulled back a moment, took another drag, then drew Beth to him, looking in her eyes as he parted her lips with his, breathing into her slowly as she drew on him. With her lips drew back, she breathed out to one side, pausing a moment, but not coughing. Again, she said. They had all the time in the world. All those moments and countdown. Another drag, shared and released, then another kiss, this time smokeless and slow, a kiss from memory, the silent explorations of new lovers. Few moments were left between them, Her cigarette fell. Reflex moved her hand to rescue it in the carpet. With a smile, Jay dropped his cigarette next to hers. Mañana, mañana, he whispered. She laughed and whispered back, ashes to ashes. One last moment. There was one last moment. They closed their eyes, they embraced, they kissed, and then there were none.
Wow. So yeah, please express your appreciation of Ashes to Ashes, Mañana, Mañana by Kevlin Henney. Excellent. Brilliant. Okay, so moving on. Next up is Debbie, and she. You are reading what you read last time, aren't you?
Yeah, not the same one as I did last time.
No. Yeah. No,
which was the same passage, but no, it's a different part of the same book.
Fabulous. Right. I'm really been looking forward to hearing this, actually. So Debbie's returning with her self-published young adult novel. And so please make some noise for Debbie Daley reading from her paranormal novel, A Grave Affair.
Thank you. As I said, when I last read, it was actually from the first two chapters of my novelette for young adults called A Grave Affair, which is, I like to call it a ghostly murder mystery. It's about 16-year-old Jackson Harrison, Jax to his friends, and he's very unhappy at having moved with his family into a flat that overlooks the graveyard. As Jax is about to go to bed on his first night, he gets up to close his bedroom curtains and glances down into the graveyard below. He's surprised to see a young girl in what looks like old-fashioned clothing sitting on a bench. Suddenly, she looks up at him and he falls back in shock at the intensity of her gaze. When he looks again, the girl has gone. Today I'll be reading chapter 4, but at the end of chapter 3, we find Jax, Danny, his friend, and their other friend, Jay's Sharma, in the flat the following day when they notice a similar-looking girl, but this time in modern dress, sitting on the same bench. Danny and Jay's goad Jackson into going down to speak to her. Chapter 4, Picking Up Daisy. Jackson soon reached the entrance to the graveyard. The ancient rusting metal gate creaked open like the prop of an old horror movie. As he entered the graveyard, he could see the girl sitting on the bench. She still had her head back with her eyes closed, soaking in the warm rays of the sun. Upon reaching her, he said, "Hi." Startled by the sound, she opened her eyes quickly and turned to look at him, dropping her notebook to the ground as she did so. She recognized him as one of the boys from the balcony and so cast a quick glance in its direction before turning back to him. "Hi," she replied as she bent down to retrieve the notebook. Jackson's mind whirred as he tried to think of an opening line. He decided to start with an apology. "Sorry if my mate annoyed you." He indicated the boys peering down from the balcony. The girl eyed him coolly. "He didn't." Jackson sat down on the bench, placed his hands between his knees and looked down at them. "Where do I go from here?" he pondered. The girl shuffled along to the end of the bench to get as far away from this stranger as was possible without wanting to appear too rude. She sat stiff and straight, unsure of what was going on. She was alone in a graveyard, having been approached by this strange boy. She decided that directness was probably the best option. "Did you want something?" she asked, more confidently than she felt. She could sense that the boy was unsure of himself, and it made her relax a little. Eventually, Jackson said, I just wondered if you came here much." He could have kicked himself at the lameness of the line, and he tried grinning to show that he knew how lame it was. The girl looked at him pityingly. "Is that your best chat-up line? It's a bit crap," she said, shaking her head and grinning inwardly. Jackson looked embarrassed and blurted out his response. "Oh, no, I wasn't chatting you up. Not that you're not worth chatting up. I mean, you are, of course." His inside seemed to shrivel up in embarrassment with every word. This couldn't be going worse, he thought to himself. The girl seemed highly amused at his discomfort. Well, that's good to know, thanks, she said lightly, trying to stifle a grin. Jackson squirmed in his seat and scratched his head awkwardly. He wished he had a bit of Danny's bravado in these situations, but the truth was Jackson was always quite shy around girls. Sorry, he mumbled. Geez, he breathed before saying, it's just that we only moved into our flat yesterday, he pointed up at the apartment, and I thought I saw you here last night. The girl looked sceptical. I don't think so. I've never been here before, she replied. She looked up at the poorly hidden Danny and Jays watching them from the balcony doors. You lot must be really well off if you can afford a flat like that at your age. What are you, footballers or something? Jackson looked confused before realising that she must think that the flat belonged to him and his mates. Oh, no, I moved there with my family. They're my mates, Dan and Jays. The girl waved at the pair and Danny and Jays waved tentatively back at her. Jackson continued, well, if it wasn't you, whoever it was, she looked really like you. The girl looked interested suddenly. Really? What time did you see her? She asked. Jackson thought this was the bit where she thought him balmy. About midnight, he said sheepishly. The girl burst out laughing. Her pretty face flushed and tears glistened in her bright blue eyes. Midnight? Are you kidding? I think you must have been dreaming, or perhaps you saw a ghost, she offered teasingly. Jackson was indignant. I wasn't dreaming. I was wide awake, he said, looking slightly annoyed. And she weren't no ghost either. There aren't such a thing. Anyway, she was as clear to me as you are. The girl smiled at him placatingly. Okay, if you say so. Jackson decided not to pursue the matter and so changed the subject to why she was there. So if you don't mind me asking, what are you doing here anyway? It's a bit of a weird place to hang out. The girl looked at him disparagingly. Not that it's anything to do with you, she began, but I'm here looking for an ancestor's grave. I'm doing my family history, and apparently my 2 times great aunt, Violet Baker, is meant to be buried around here somewhere. The girl looked around at the graves surrounding them. I've had a look, but I can't seem to find a headstone or anything for her. So maybe there isn't one, or perhaps, like so many of these, I can't read it. Jackson cast his gaze around at the headstones. I can help you look if you like, he offered. When did she die? The girl thanked him. I found a memorial card for her in some old papers of my nan's that said she died in August 1903, but nothing else. But there's nothing else that I found. From the card, it seems that she was about our age, from what I can work out. The thought made Jackson feel a pang of sympathy. Blimey, that's young, he said. Yeah, agreed the girl, it is. I'm 17 in October, Jackson said. I can't imagine what it would do to my mum and dad if anything happened to me. The girl shook her head sadly. I know, it must have been awful for the family. I'm 17 in December and it would kill my parents. The pair began to search the inscriptions of the gravestones and tombs nearby. Like the girl had said, many of them were indecipherable. As they searched, Jackson asked how the girl they were looking for had been related. She was my nan's aunt, she answered. Apparently, my mum said my nan had never mentioned her, even though she talked about other aunts and uncles. And as my nan died last year, I can't ask her. It's because Nan died that I thought I'd start building my family tree. That's when I discovered that my great nanny Lily had a sister called Violet who died young. My mum thinks there might be some mystery surrounding her. Maybe that's why she was never mentioned. I mean, my nan wasn't born till well after Violet died, so it's not like she would have known her. Jackson rubbed his hand over his head. He could find nothing with even a hint of Violet's name on it. Why do you think there might be some kind of mystery involved? Didn't people die young in those days anyway? He said. The girl shrugged. I suppose, I don't know. Just hoped that it might be a bit more interesting than that. Does that sound bad? Jackson shook his head. The girl then went on. I know that childhood mortality was particularly high for the very poor, and I don't think my family were exactly well off. I suppose she could have got sick or something. I was just hoping that there might be a clue on her gravestone to say forking out for a death certificate. But having looked at the other graves around here, none of them give you any idea, other than that you can see some would have died of old age. There are just simple words or poems on most of them. Jackson conceded defeat. Well, I can't see her grave around here. What makes you think she's buried in this graveyard anyway? He asked. The girl looked disappointed. There's a note on the back of the memorial card saying that the burial would be in South Eastleigh Graveyard, and this is the only one, she answered. Then she too accepted that what she was hoping to find wasn't there. Look, thanks for helping, but I've got to go. I might try and come back tomorrow to have another look around. I'd like to put some flowers on her grave, just to let her know we're thinking of her. Now we know she existed. Jackson nodded. Well, good luck, he said. And if you need a hand looking for her again, just give me a shout. I'm only up there. He nodded in the direction of the balcony. The girl smiled. Thanks, she said before turning to leave. As she walked away, she said goodbye. See ya, Jackson called after her. Oh, and I'm Jax, by the way, Jax Harrison. The girl swung round and smiled while walking backwards towards the gate. Daisy, she called back. Daisy Nash. Thank you. Can't hear you, Helen.
It's fatal when I mute myself because I always forget. Yeah. Thank you. I always forget. Okay, so our next new reader is David, who has recently started a publishing company, Sergeant Frosty Publications, give him a quick plug, which concentrates on children's and historical and science fiction themed ebooks for children. Now, I've known David for about 30 years because we were in an orbiter together. But besides helping other authors publish their work, he's also an accomplished author himself. And so I'd like to introduce to you David Flynn, who is going to read an extract, I believe, from Walkers with Watson.
That's correct.
Fabulous.
Yes.
Take it away, Maestro.
Very well. Yes. Now, the premise for Walkers for Watson came about quite simply. A dog is man's best friend. Sherlock Holmes is a man. Sherlock Holmes' best friend is Dr. Watson. You can see where this is going. This is a story in which Dr. Watson is in fact a dog. And the chapter 1 is entitled Fetching a Stick. Holmes put on his deer stalker. I assumed he was going to stalk deer. We don't get many deer in Baker Street, but Holmes has this remarkable ability to see things that others miss. I bounded to my feet, for this could be the start of another adventure. Calm yourself, Watson, Holmes said gruffly. We need a lead before we can solve the case. I rushed off to get my lead. This was really exciting. Permit me to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Watson, MD. MD stands for Magical Dog, and I help my master solve crimes. I sometimes work for the CID, Criminal Investigating Dogs. Indeed, together, my master and I solve many crimes. I assist him in some small part and detail some of the more illuminating cases. I just collected my lead and we went out for a walk. While we were out, I found a stick and collected it for evidence. Holmes wasn't so sure it was useful and threw it away with all his strength. Naturally, I bounded after the stick and returned it, and thus we passed an eventful and fruitful afternoon. Holmes threw the stick and I collected it. That was the natural order of things. Eventually, Holmes got tired and sat down. Tell me what you deduce about this stick, Holmes said, passing it to me. I barked. You know my methods. I sniffed at the stick. It's a stick, I said. Throw it again. He laughed and threw it again. I brought it back. You are a dog of illumination, Holmes said. I don't know what illumination means. I'm a dog. Try again. It was a walking stick. Not a stick that walks, you understand, but a stick that two legs uses to help it walk. Usually someone elderly, someone who didn't like people running around them, running around their feet, barking, in case they got knocked over. It's a stick, I said. A dog can always talk with their master. That's why people always talk to their own dogs. Of course, dogs don't know as much as their masters, so we rarely say much. And most masters don't understand us. But that doesn't matter, because most two-legs don't listen to what people tell them anyway. Holmes does. Very good, Watson. Is there more? I sniffed again. It had warm metal at one end and was well made, although it had a lot of marks on it. A lot of bite marks. Bite marks that have probably come from a person of about my size. Oops. There was a nameplate on the other end. I pointed this out to Holmes. Very good. It says, presented to Henry Mortimer, C.C.H. What do you think that means, Watson? I growled. C is for cat. C is for cat. H is for hound. Very astute, Watson. Wrong, but astute. It's unlikely that two cats and a hound would present this rather fine presentation to Dr. Mortimer. I perceive that the owner is a doctor because of the distinctive aroma of formaldehyde used in medical experiments that still attaches itself to the stick. I growled. My master didn't have my nose. There was no formaldehyde thingy what's-it on the stick. But Holmes was always right about deductions. There was no formaldehyde thingy on the stick, but he said there was. This was quite a three-rat problem. I saw the first rat and chased after it. Of course, if the smell wasn't on the stick, but there was an aroma, then there had to be a secret compartment in the stick. And my last collection must have dislodged a small quantity of formaldehyde thingy inside this secret compartment. Or maybe Holmes was doing his job of pretending to be able to smell something. He prided himself on his sensitive nose, but he was a two-legs and not very good at detecting smells. Quite right, Watson. I suspect that the good doctor will come for his stick. Let us return to Baker Stick and await him, and perhaps we can partake of Mrs. Hudson's dinner. I believe she has a bone for you. Great. Always like to dispose of incriminating evidence.
Are you done? Okay, so let's hear it for David Flynn and Walk is with Watson. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Noticed quite a few people chuckling there.
Yeah.
Fab. Thank you so much, David. Okay, so I'm going to put this session to bed now with a reading from the Zarduth Imperative Clanship. And before you ask, I haven't published this yet. But Fiction Fix is for self-published, independently published, unpublished, and even unfinished work. So it's fine. So, right. So we're going to return to chapter 5, in which IR asks Hardy Brencher, for his strategic expertise as to how to proceed now that the Bickel has arrived in the Declaney system. IR glanced at Jaffer, recalled from his rest period to the Navcon so that he could confer with Hardy. Jaffer smothered a yawn, but he hadn't protested. Thanks for meeting me, Hardy. I need your experience as a strategist. IR indicated the sim tank. We can't just sit here forever. Someone has to find out what's going on down on Declane. Matters are coming to a head. 3 Earth pursuit ships have just entered the system. If we're to move at all, it must be soon, since I assume they have similar equipment to ours on board and can detect us using their own sim tanks. A reasonable assumption. And who had you in mind to go and snoop around on Declane? I figured that was probably your department. I can teach you to pilot the shuttle while we're here. It won't take long. Hardy didn't seem the least bit put out by IR's suggestion. How long? A couple of hours for someone of your experience. The Voth detection systems may not pick up a single shuttle, and the Bickel can stay hidden until we make a run for Declane. Good idea, Hardy said. I think you've thought this out already without my help. Yes, but I wanted to run it past you. In a few days, the Zeret Kachav system will be in line with Declane and we won't be hidden all the time anymore. So if I could just explain, Zeret Kachav is a binary planet system. So they're circling each other about a common centre of gravity, and they're next door, if you like, in the solar system to Declane. And Hardy is actually the security chief for the children. Okay, and if we don't do something, there was no point in coming. I know we've been waiting for the Kameen to arrive, but we don't necessarily need them here for a recce mission. Ideally, we might even be able to persuade the Earth ships to help us once we know what's going on, Hardy mused. At least I might. He turned back to the sim tank. It looks as if the pursuit has surrounded the Kameen, he said. If so, that could provide the distraction we need. Exactly. Look, IR pointed into the sim tank. Soon, Zeret Kachav will be at Perideck with Declane, meaning we can cross open space more quickly. We can slip out of here, make a run for it across the intervening space, hide among Declane's moons, as our Shiroli did, check what the simulation situation is on planet using the SimTank upscale facility once we're there, and send a shuttle down to the planet to carry out a more thorough ground reconnoitre. I'd suggest a small crew. You, me, Chan and Rel, and perhaps Mill on comms. I did promise him I'd include him in the landing party. Once we've got the information we need, we can contact the Earth ships and ask for their help in dispatching the Voth ships left here and the enemy forces on planet if that's appropriate to the situation down there. It sounds good in practice. Oh, sorry, in theory, Hardy said, though I'm not so sure about the practice part. What worries me is we can't cross from here to Declane in hyperdrive. Unfortunately not, IR agreed. The gravitational field around planets subjects hyperdrive ships to tidal forces and rips them up. That's why we use a second propulsion system in the shuttles and in the Clanships within a solar system. So although the hulls of both Clanships and shuttles are mirrored for stealth, we need a diversion. He locked his gaze with Hardy's. You seem reluctant to make a move. That sounded like an objection. I am reluctant. If we get into trouble, can we guarantee your friends will help us out? If they can. IR paused. One thing's for sure, at present we can't ask for help from the Earth ships. Well, Hardy said, we'll never get a better chance. Have you spoken to the others about it? No, I wanted to talk to you first. And we'll need to get a message to Afdar and Omol, or they might not realise. I'm sure they'll know what you're up to, Hardy interrupted with a wry grin. But it'd be worth discussing it with them. He pointed to the Kameen. Let's contact them and ask them to play along with us on this. IR nodded. Once we have the information we need, we can come back to Zeret Kachav and bring in the Velacta and the Kameen, perhaps even the Earth ships if you, can persuade them. We might ask for custody of you and your friends in trade for their help, Hardy warned. I would. We'll deal with that when it happens, IR said, more philosophically than he felt. The pregnant ladies hid the ship between Bakar and Amax. We saw that from the ship's logs, Hardy said. Yes, but our situation may be more complex than theirs. Right now, we must avoid being spotted by the pursuit from Earth as well. What's the status of the Voth fleet at Declane? Hardy asked. IR upscaled 20% and pointed to the ships. 5 ships have been dispatched to Havirtal. We picked up a radio message from them earlier, though we had to edge out to the limb of Kachav to get it. So now we're also avoiding discovery by the 5 ships heading out to Havirtal, Hardy added. There's obviously something major going on there that requires reinforcements. Precisely. But by the time we arrive at Declane, they'll be out of our way. Hardy thought for a moment, then added, can you alter the viewpoint on this? He gestured to the sim tank. If I go into sim mode instead of real-time mode, let's get a bird's eye view. As if from the Voth fleet's position, Hardy nodded. It'll give us a better idea as to whether the plan is viable. Right. IR gave the voice commands, and the perspective in the sim tank changed to that from above the Voth space station. He found himself looking down on Declane at its 3 moons. Blood and thunder! There's no hiding place there after all. Wait, can't you get the perspective down to the level of the Voth ships? You're way above them. IR made the adjustment and saw immediately that Hardy was right. All's not lost then, he murmured, as the perspective changed again. This time he could see the moons only as they passed on the near side of Declane. He ran a simulation and watched for a few orbits to see if they really did provide a hiding place. Grus might be a better place to hide than Bakar and Amax, as they're close to Declane and orbit more quickly, although they're tidally locked with the planet. That means exposure more often. He said as much to Hardy. If we're here for any length of time, we might need to juggle positions between the 3 satellites, ride one, then another, and so on. Can we compute such a complex flight path? Of course. IR leaned closer to the sim tank and followed another line of sight trajectory. You can't see the other side of the Zerek-Kachav system from the Voth position at Declane at present. He gave another voice command, and in the sim tank, Zerek-Kachav jumped ahead in its orbit. It was now directly in line with Declane and offered very little in the way of cover for either the Bakel or the Velacta. Compute how many days cover remain if we stay in our present position. 5. We've only a matter of time before we have to do something, Hardy agreed. But what will happen to the Earth pursuit ships if they're seen by the Voth? I assumed they'd think that they were Zarduthi. IR followed the other line of sight trajectory. It was true. The Earth ships were so much target practice for the Voth crawlers. We can't warn them directly, or we'll give away our position here, he said. But we could warn the Kameen, and despite being larger, this design of ship has the advantage against the Voth fleet in terms of speed and manoeuvrability. An attack on the Kameen would take the crawler's attention away from us, perhaps just long enough for us to reach Declane and hide on the underside of Grus. The situation will never be better than that, Hardy agreed. And you think the fleet's about to move either to Havirtal or Earth, and this is the perfect time for action? Something like that, IR agreed. But I'd suggest we have contingency plans for getting a message to the Velacta as well, if necessary. He turned towards the other crew members. All right, he said. Listen, everybody. Here's what we're going to do next. Of course, you've all worked out that it's all going to go pear-shaped now. Thank you very much. Okay, so many thanks to all our lovely authors and readers, Colin, Debbie, David, Kevlin and Amanda for joining us. Do applaud yourselves and each other. Right, authors. I know Amanda and Kevlin, I think, have made a couple of notes in the chat. So don't forget to include links to your books on Kindle and wherever else in the chat, or send them to me and I will post them on my timeline in the Finger on the Pulse and on my YouTube channel, Helen Claire Gould, as well. Wherever this video is going up, in fact. Include the prices and your websites as well, because we want to let people know where you are and how they can buy your books. So this has been Helen Claire Gould comparing fiction fix online and bringing new and established writers in various genres to your attention. So many thanks for joining us. And the next Fiction Fix Online is on Sunday, the 7th of March at 4 p.m. till just after 5. I look forward to catching up with you then. And if you have time at 8 p.m. on Tuesday, you can also join me on my personal live stream for approximately half an hour. It now has a wacky name, Poetry Sandwich. Cheerio for now. Okay.
Bye-bye.
So I'm going to stop recording. Right. Yes.